All right, folks, it's 9 o'clock. Let's get ourselves started. It's tradition around here to take some sort of drink. Hey, sorry, it was 9 o'clock. Had to do it. We couldn't interfere with Mr. Ritchie, of course. This is Mr. Lagerway. I'm obviously not Mr. Ritchie, but I'm another APUSH teacher. I am an APUSH teacher up in Michigan, and I am also an AP grader, and so I grade some of the responses. Just real quick, if you can all make sure you can hear me okay, give me about a 1 to 5 in the chat. 1 being like, hey, I'm feeling great about this test, and a 5 being like, wait, it should be the other way around, shouldn't it? It's AP. So what shouldn't we say? 5, feeling like I'm getting a 5, and 1's like, I'm freaking out. If you can hear me, type something like that in the chat, please. Oh, we have a bunch of 5s. People are feeling confident. That's fantastic. Hey, fellow Michiganders, fantastic. All right, Dara, it's my job to make sure that you feel a little bit more confident going forward, and that'll be the case. 4.5, 11. Oh, it was a 1 typo. Okay, just making sure. Just making sure. All right, Dakota, I will do my best. Oh, a -5. We will change that for sure, for sure. Good to see some fellow Michiganders out there as well. Fantastic. Welcome to you folks, and welcome wherever you're from. So this is a 5-able live stream. Obviously, you're here because you're taking the APUSH test, and you're hoping to do a little bit better. And so best of luck to you. We're only about a week and a couple days away. So next week, Friday is the big day, and here it comes. So want to do a couple things. 1, make sure that, these live streams are always free, which is fantastic. If you're interested in 5-able Plus, that gives you access to all of their back catalogs and things like that. So you can access all the videos and things like that, some extra resources, etc. That's an option for you. And, sorry, Ohio. Can't do that. I'm a big Michigan Blue fan, but that's okay. That's neither here nor there. We're all here to talk about American history today. So Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, excellent. All over the great United States of America and perhaps all around the world. So wanted to give you a little bit of an outline of what we're going to be doing tonight. And so let me share my screen a second with you and make sure that that's all set and ready to go. Can you all see the sharing okay? You can see the words 5-able there. We're all good. See my mouse bouncing around. All right. And I see we have some questions already and some people who are already answering some of those, which is fantastic. So again, my job here is to take you into the test, try to get you closer to getting a 5. And I've been at the reading before, so I have some tips in that regard. And some of it's just basic stuff. Some of it's stuff you may have never heard before. Some of it gets really granular, really detailed. But hey, whatever helps you with doing the studying things. Madeline, I want to see that attitude improve. You can do it. I know you can. You go in there with some confidence, you'll be able to do it. And remember, just like Mr. Ritchie always says, stay hydrated, right? So that's always important. So we're going to be looking at inside the test. I'm doing another one tomorrow night. It's going to be a little bit earlier for those of you that were complaining this took too long. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit earlier, 7:30, I believe, tomorrow night, talking about dates. That is a very important topic in APUSH. No one's favorite, but we're not just going to be like, hey, you should study all the dates and memorize them all. I got some strategies for you and some important things to remember about those and how you can use those on your essays. And then a reminder that you're going to need to be able to go to the same link as you did today. And think 5-able. You can always follow all those people on social media in a variety of places. So, Dan, maybe we should go over some period 6 stuff and talk about what a monopoly is. So outline of tonight, obviously questions and answers are absolutely applicable. So feel free to ask them whenever. I'll actually start with some of those right away once we get into this. But otherwise, I want to make sure you understand the course as a whole. And I know that sounds kind of weird, kind of basic, but stick with me, we'll be okay. We understand the exam itself, understanding the reading, whatever that means, and then also making sure that we are understanding questions, concerns that you have. I'm here for you folks. That's what I'm all about. So yeah, we should be okay. So let me get to some of those questions first. And let's see, we got some questions. What's the best and easiest way to study for the exam? I'm kind of going to hit that right away. Ethan, you are correct in that Adam Norris and Crash Course are fantastic. Common mistakes on the DBQs and how you can avoid them. That's part of the exam part and the reading as well. I think I will get to that. Let's see, best way to study the different periods. I would say, again, a little bit more tomorrow on the dates part of the periods, but I like to start really broad and work my way down And then, of course, your typical Adam Norris answers, watching some Tom Ritchie videos, some Josh Productions, using whatever study book you find to be helpful, that kind of stuff. Remember, active recall is a great way to study. So quizzing yourself. Madeline, this is going to be about an hour long, but you're free to come and go as you like. And I'm here to answer questions, and I'll be here until about 10 o'clock or so. And yeah, Yahira, you're completely right. Don't cram. That is not a good way to study, for sure. And Alyssa, we'll get to the short answer stuff for sure. And then best way to answer the SAQ, Zoe asked that too, incorporating contextualization. Sure, I'll just say a brief note on that right now because I don't have anything explicit to talk about later with that. Contextualization can go anywhere in the essay, so in the LEQ or the DBQ, but you for sure want to put that in the beginning because that's a good way to set the stage. It makes sense. You have yourself an intro paragraph, right? Your English teachers tell you to set the stage and then narrow down to your thesis. That makes sense in APUSH too. So set the stage. Christian, thanks for staying up past your bedtime to hear about this. And yep, we'll talk about some thesis stuff too. Let's see. So yeah, contextualization, make sure you're talking about things that are around the time period and that are relevant. I cannot stress the relevance enough. That'll come up several times. Some of my favorite advice is if it happens in period 4, chances are pretty good that slavery is going to be involved somehow, westward expansion, of course. And if period 6 is involved, chances are pretty good industrialization could be something backwards. That'd be great. Let's see. We got a couple other ones. I think I will cover most of those later. Yeah, sounds good. If you would like to ask more questions and then feel free to vote. I can't answer them all necessarily, but I will try to answer as many of those as I can as we go. So feel free to keep asking those. Hey, some students in the chat. Hey, Lily, good to see you. Feel free to ask some more in the questions and answer section. It should be at the bottom of your screen. I know your screen looks a little bit different than mine does, but feel free to put them there. I'm also keeping an eye on the chat, but thought we'd just make ourselves go and start going through some of these slides here. So first, the course. So on the right-hand side is the picture of the course and exam description. Everything that I'm about to share, by the way, is open to the public. None of this is secret. None of this is only for teachers or things like that. But a lot of it's just things that people don't necessarily know. And so the course and exam outline, I've had my students take notes based on this. And this has several parts. It shows you what the College Board thinks is important. Obviously, you're going to emphasize different things, and that's not the only reason. It's going to give teachers guidance on coverage. So it's going to tell teachers, hey, what is important? You have to teach everything from pre-Columbus all the way to the present in a year. That's insane. So what is important? How do you make sure that you're trimming it down, etc.? It tells you what to prioritize and study, and that's where I'm going to be getting into it tonight, to show you how you can use this to study. Because you can't just go through all of your notes, all of your textbook, and try to cram everything into your brain. Absolutely. And so this has two parts, the themes and the key concepts. Again, I know this sounds kind of detailed and granular. Stick with me. I think it's worth your while if you take the time to figure out what it's about. So themes and concepts, let's get into that real quick. So each page of the concept outline looks a little bit like this. I chose one from period 7. So this is about imperialism, as you can see at the top, page 79, if you have the opportunity to look at this yourself sometime. But this is kind of small. Let's zoom in a little bit. So right at the top there is the key concept, and then you can also see that there are outlines underneath. And so the key concept tells you a big, broad overview of what's really important and what's happening. Now, here's the key to this part. The key concepts are where they get the multiple choice questions. Let me repeat that. The multiple choice questions all come from this stuff that's published online in this PDF, the course and exam description, and make sure that you know all of these statements. Now, obviously, starting big and working small is one way to go. That's what this thing is doing. Key concept 7.3, participation in a series of global conflicts propelled the United States into a position of international power. Well, that could be Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, a lot of different options, and all of those work. And then, of course, it gets smaller, so it says late 19th century, early 20th century. Oh, that sounds like more Spanish-American War era. And then, oh, it's talking about imperialists. And it even talks about racial theories and economic opportunities. Now it's telling you some stuff you need to know. Also on that page are these things called thematic learning objectives, which that's just teacher speak for, okay, here are some course themes and some big questions that you need to know. So keep in mind that those are some questions that they're going to be asking you about on the exam. So this is what I like to do. I like to quiz myself on these and tell my students to quiz themselves on these. We're going to be doing that in review probably in the next week or so. So can you analyze how ideas about national identity changed in response to U.S. involvement in international conflicts and growth of the U.S.? That's a theme that incorporates manifest destiny. That's a theme that incorporates the Spanish-American War. That's a theme that incorporates NATO from period 8, right? So that's all over the place. And then, of course, analyze the reasons for and results of U.S. diplomatic, economic, and military initiatives in North America and overseas. So that's, again, going to be talking about our involvement with other places. Dakota, these key concepts, in case you're wondering, again, if you just Google AP U.S. History course outline from the College Board, it's a PDF. You can find it online, as a couple people are telling you. Yeah, just Google what's on the screen, concept outline and exam description for APUSH. You find it no problem. So this is a good way to make sure you're studying the important things, and also to make sure that you have some excellent, thank you, Elise, appreciate the link. Make sure that you have some important themes to be able to think about. Next, again, this is the multiple choice, sorry about that. And then also in here, this is where you have to list all of your specific historical vocab words. That's kind of how they set this up. And obviously, maybe your teacher made you do flashcards or terms or IDs or identifications. I had my students just fill this thing out in a Google Doc. But either way, this is where you need specific examples that create your evidence in the essays. So notice right here, it doesn't say Spanish-American War. It doesn't say Anti-Imperialist League. It doesn't say Alfred Thayer Mahan. It doesn't, right? All of those things from period 7. But that's where you fill them in. You need to be able to prove, in a sense, these right here by citing a couple of examples over here, because this could be a short answer question. They could say, what did people use around the turn of the century in order to justify imperialism? And you'd need to be able to cite social Darwinism. You'd be able to need to say white man's burden, something like that. And that would be a good idea. So that's kind of the key concept, the exam description. I hope that works well. And feel free to mess around with that. If you have more questions about that, I'll keep going a little bit later. And we'll talk more about the themes in just a second. Let me check on the questions a second. Let's see. We got some tips for LEQs, DBQs. Yeah. We'll get to those. Dakota, I think the best way to study the different periods is definitely going to be this thing. Yeah. Making sure that you know the big concepts, start big, work your way small. And then some of those dates that we're going to be talking about next week, tomorrow at 7:30, same place, is going to be around the same topics. How do you study these big periods? How do you make sure that you're learning some of the essentials? And then we'll talk about some of those writing things in just a little bit. All right. So back to this. Again, these themes are the bedrock of many of the exam questions. So I would make sure that you can trace important themes through different periods and events. So this is where you make sure, hey, I need to know about women during the colonial era and during the antebellum era. Well, yes, it turns out that women, as half of the human race, are generally fairly important. And so you need to make sure that you can trace what's happening to them in American history. No, you don't need 5 Plus to watch tomorrow as long as you're watching it live. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sandra is correct. Yeah. So make sure that you're able to analyze national identity, et cetera, et cetera. I have the PDF pulled up, and if you're curious later on, once we get through this, if you want some more examples of that, we can talk about those. Yeah, Ty, the College Board thing is really long, but again, I would just go to where you need to, get yourself a little bit familiar with some of that stuff. Go period 1. It even has nice introductory paragraphs for you. Don't waste your time reading all the introductory jibberty-jabberty stuff or all the stuff for your teacher. Just make sure that you're paying attention to the themes for sure. Again, this is evidence for all your different CCOT essays, change continuity over time, compare, contrast, all that good stuff. And then this is a great way to identify holes in your knowledge. If you can't answer some of these questions, oh, that's a great place to go do some studying. Absolutely. And then make sure you can answer these as you study. Hiram, that is true. Yes, it will be. Yes. So understanding the exam a bit more. I accidentally clicked on a link. Sorry about that. Just takes me right to where you folks were. So understanding the exam. The exam is themes, concepts, and rubrics all put together. So you take the things we just talked about and you add in the rubrics, and then there you go. That's for the writing, though. So keep in mind, these are downloadable. Don't miss the easy things. Please use it as a study tool if you can. Know your rubrics. There's no excuse. Make sure you can answer the thematic questions. Do you have evidence to back up the key concepts? Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me just make that full screen for you folks one more time, and then we should be good. P.S. There's actually exam instructions available for free online too. If you're curious, like, oh, what kind of timing advice do they give us? Do they give us a 5-minute warning or a 10-minute warning? P.S. The answer is 10. They give you a 10-minute warning before the end of each section. If you're wondering about timing, what the proctors say, none of this is secret, but if it helps you feel a little bit better on exam day, go ahead and check that out. It's the AP exam instructions. You can Google those things. Let's see. So then, if that's the exam, let's talk about some other things that I would recommend on the exam. So make sure you know the rubrics. You get, now this is crucial, you get a sample rubric on the exam. It looks like this. I took this from a publicly released document-based question from last time. So you get a basic outline. Notice what it says there. Respond to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis, describes the context, supports an argument using at least 6 like basics here. But folks, you don't want to be basic. You want to get a 5, right? And so in order to make sure that you understand these rubrics, obviously you and your teachers have perhaps been going through these all year, but even if you haven't, this is an opportunity to be able to learn a bit more from this. So let's look at this a little bit more. The full PDF you can download, if you just Google AP History's rubrics, it provides decision rules which can explain and guide your writing. This is what they look like. So the thesis claim, it responds to the prompt of the historically defensible thesis. Okay, yeah, we've seen that before. But then notice this, it's new. To earn this point, the thesis must make a claim that responds to the prompt rather than restating or rephrasing the prompt. Oh my goodness, I pull my hair out. I can't tell you how many times at the reading you see students who basically just rewrite the prompt and don't add any sort of argument to it. You have to do that. It's crucial. Thanks for the links in the notes, guys. That's fantastic. So another thing that I like to do, let me just go back for a second. Download, look at the rubrics. It has some useful guidance for you, and we'll talk more about those later as we talk about the essays. So another way that I like to talk about getting inside the test is asking, what do the test writers want? That's kind of a big meta question. And of course, it's easier for us teachers that have been doing this for a while. We're familiar with this. We've seen a lot of tests come and go. But this is from the publicly released practice test that goes with the course and concept outline. Yeah, happy is the same as hippo for sure, that we're seeing in the chat. This comes from the publicly released exam, from the fall 2017 practice exam. And this is kind of where I feel a lot of students get bogged down. I saw someone ask a question earlier, is the SAT US history exam subject test basically the same thing as APUSH? The answer is basically no, unfortunately. Although there's similar content, the APUSH skills that we just went over are so critical. And if you don't know the rubrics, if you don't know how to jump through the hoops, you're not going to do as well. There's different kinds of writing. And so knowing history is very important. Knowing how to show that you know the history is also really important. So let's take a look at a couple of these things. So again, you need to study history. You need to watch your videos. You need to do some content review with Mr. Ritchie, Mr. Norris, Jose, Hip Hughes, all of those guys. You need to go over your review books. But you also need to make sure you know sort of you can play the game. And I'm not trying to advocate learning less history. I'm just wanting to make sure that you can show when you know your history. So let's take this one, for example. When I see Alan Taylor, Historian American Colonies, that should set off alarm bells in your head right away and place it within a period. And this is another reason why I think starting big is often very helpful. We'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow night. But Alan Taylor wrote a book called American Colonies, fantastic book, by the way, the premier book for periods 1 and 2, if you're curious. And you're already in period 2 at this point. You see American Colonies, you should think period 2, maybe period 1. But period 1, remember, is Columbian Exchange, Native Americans, initial contacts, not a lot of colonies, right? And so in my mind, I'm going period 2. Then I start to read a little bit. The colonizers brought along plants and animals new to the Americas, some by design and others by accident. That should again set off alarm bells in your head. You should think, Columbian Exchange. chances are pretty good that they're going to ask me something about how the Columbian Exchange or new methods of interaction between natives and Europeans changed both, caused them to have problems, etc. You need to be thinking about, why are they giving me this prompt? Why are they giving me this stimulus? Why are they giving me this question? What do they want me to talk about? I know a lot of history, and I know a lot of you do too, right? So say to yourself, I know a lot of history, and here's how I'm going to be showing that. So make sure that you pay attention to these parts right here. These parts right here are the citations, right? The part that the sourcing, it tells you where it's coming from. That is crucial. Now, in this case, it's a secondary source. It's not super helpful, but it gets us on the right track. Couple other examples. This one, also from the same practice exam. This is a chart, but again, the same thing. You look at the dates, you go, oh, this is in period 4. That's 1800 to 1848, maybe a little bit of period 5-ish, but I know where I am. And it says migration to the United States. Gosh, the only migration I remember happening during that time was German and Irish. And what else do I remember about that? Oh, some people didn't like them, right? Because they were drinking too much and they were too Catholic and they weren't quite Anglo-Saxon enough. And so there was this whole backlash. What was that called again? Nativism. Yeah. Well, it turns out, by the way, the questions they ask you about this graph are about, why did the Germans and the Irish come over? Was it the Germans and the Irish? What sort of problems did they face, backlash, etc., and why did they come? Keep in mind the market revolution is happening during this time, jobs, right? So if you know your history and you're able to put things into context, you can guess what they're going to ask you about before you even see any of the questions. And especially in this case, you want to look at charts, graphs, and tell me, all right, what is the overall pattern? Dakota, I appreciate the compliment, but I think you too can be smart if you just kind of play the game, right? Look at this chart and notice that the spike goes up and it goes way up in the 1840s and 50s. Now, again, if you know your history really well, you know, okay, that's the Irish and the Germans. But even if you don't, you go, a rise in immigration. I've been slightly awake at APUSH this year. I know that that means some people are going to be grumpy about it. And, well, all right. That's as far as I have to go for right now. And then you start going and thinking about it. Use what you know to be able to interpret what you see. So Annie, you asked, when is the new immigration? Well, so the new immigration on this chart that I'm trying to show you here starts in about, looks like 1843 or so, or at least it picks up. They sometimes refer to new immigration versus old immigration. Oh yeah, Mia, there you go. There you go. Yeah, so old immigrants, meaning Irish and immigrants, German immigrants in the mid-1800s. New immigrants would be the Southern and Eastern European ones in the later part, the 1880s, 90s, up through about 1924 with the Immigration Control Act of 1924. So yeah, Irish and Germans are considered the old ones, and then your Jews, your Russians, your Poles, Greeks, etc., Italians are the so-called new immigrants. And those are going to be the 1880s through about the 1920s or so. Yeah. So again, getting inside the mind of the test to figure out what questions they're even going to ask first is often very helpful. Because again, I get it. Some of these prompts are confusing. They use big words. You're like, oh man, I'm kind of stressed. Plus, you don't want to spend a ton of time reading every single word. So how do you get it? How do you get it? So here's another example. John Calhoun, political leader, 1844. By the way, notice what I'm doing here. I'm reading the source first. I don't even read the actual paragraph yet. I just go right to the source and I say, John C. Calhoun, okay, politician, antebellum era. What do I know about him? He looks really, really scary. In fact, you know what? We just need to do this right now. Let's make sure we, everybody shield your eyes, all right? John Calhoun, get ready. We're going to search for an image of him. Ooh, this guy can look freaky sometimes, right? So this man was a scary, scary dude, but he was also a brilliant politician and had a whole bunch to say and did a whole bunch during the antebellum era. Also had some terrible views on his fellow human beings, but was critical in making sure that the Union stayed together before the Civil War. But that's not really my point. Oh, absolutely. Adam Norris loves talking about this guy. Yeah. So hopefully you know at least a little bit about him. Let me go back to my presentation. But even if you don't, 1844, that tells you period 4. It tells you right around the time of the Mexican-American War. It tells you pre-Civil War. Again, big dates are really important. More on that tomorrow. And then, of course, John C. Calhoun is probably going to talk about slavery because he's kind of known for some of that stuff. And notice what it says once I start to read the paragraph itself. So my guess is, well, what kind of questions do they ask you about slavery in the antebellum era? Actually, let me kick this out to you folks because you folks are so engaged and so intelligent. So help us out in the chat. What sort of questions do you think the College Board would ask about slavery in the antebellum era? Go ahead and hit up in the chat what sort of questions you think the College Board would answer or ask you, sorry, about slavery in the antebellum era. Some people took the final today. That's good to know. That's good to know. Joe's talking slave states versus free states, sectionalism. Kareem, antebellum era, by the way, sorry, just a fancy term for ante means before, bellum is war in Latin, so before war, before the Civil War. Compromise, compare, contrast, good reasons, positive. Ooh, Annie mentions the positive good. Bonus points there. Yeah, John C. Calhoun calls slavery a positive good. Yeah, sorry about that, folks. Antebellum era. Sorry if your teachers didn't use that phrase. Antebellum era is going to be pre-Civil War. Yeah, so a lot of people are mentioning a lot of stuff that you know. Free soil, Kansas, Nebraska, Mexican-American War, market revolution, nullification, Republican Party. Folks, somebody that said free versus slave states, you got it. Westward expansion and then the slavery arguments that go along with it dominate politics, and I can almost guarantee you there's going to be at least one question on the exam or a series of questions on the exam about that. So there's probably going to be a section that says, all right, maybe it's about manifest destiny, but what controversies came from manifest destiny? Or maybe it's about slavery and it says, why did slavery become such a contentious issue? Because every time we move west, we've got to decide if it's a free state or a slave state, right? How did slaveholders respond to abolitionist pressure? Zane, I like that one too. So again, how does the pressure cooker of the pre-Civil War era lead people to more extreme positions, right? You got John Brown, you got, on one side, you got John C. Calhoun, you got some Alexander H. Stevens on the pro-slavery side, right? You got David Walker and his appeal to the colored folks of the world on the other side. I mean, this is a contentious fight, right? So we haven't even read the paragraph yet, and you folks already listed a ton of vocab that might be able to help you answer, and a ton of topics and a ton of questions. Oh, yes, Preston Brooks. Yes, absolutely. The caning and Sumner and all that stuff. Yeah, caning of Sumner. Oh, boy. By the way, don't confuse Sumner, Charles Sumner, with Fort Sumter, the place where the first shots were fired of the Civil War. Commonly confused. Garrison and the Liberator. Oh, yes, absolutely. Frederick Douglass and the North Star, right? All of those things, Harper's Ferry. There's a lot of stuff going on during this period, and you know it. And now that we start to read the conditions of the African race throughout all the states with the ancient relation between this Negro, morals, intelligence, civil. Okay, it sounds like he's talking about slavery, and yeah, we should read that thing carefully, but we already have this thing down. And it turns out, again, they ask the kind of questions that you folks already knew. Bill Clinton, radio address to the nation, 1996. This puts it in what period? Drop a number in the chat below. What period is this in if it's in 1996, folks? Dara, Du Bois versus Washington is going to be period 6 and 7. Hey, period 9. Nice work, everybody. Good job. Yeah. It also looks like a whole bunch of Germans just saying no over and over again if I were to, pronounce them. 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. And then Dan had a whole bunch of German no's. So that works well. Thanks. Yeah. Joe, don't worry about that too much. I mean, do a little bit on your own, like watch the Adam Norris 10-minute overview, watch one of Tom Ritchie's period 9 streams, something like that. But remember, it's only 5% of the entire exam. So I would not freak out about that so much. Either way, this is period 9. Fantastic. And then notice it's Bill Clinton. And what's happening in the 1990s, remember, this is period 9, which is part of the rise and the upsurge of modern-day conservatism. So Bill Clinton has to be what's called a modern Democrat. And we looked at some political cartoons in my class. I mean, Bill Clinton can't be an old-fashioned liberal Lyndon Johnson, FDR style Democrat, right? He has to be a little bit new. He's a little more centrist. And so he starts doing things Republican style. Interesting. Julie, great question. Hold that thought for later. It'll actually be very helpful to slip that in later. What topics tend to be on every exam? Or someone ask it in the questions and then upvote it, and then I'll make sure to answer that later. So the era of big government is over. Oh, that sounds like a Republican talking. And it turns out that in the questions, it's talking about, who does this sound like? Well, it sounds like another Republican you might be familiar with, Ronald Reagan. Hi, Austin. So that's really excellent. I'm glad that we know about that. Let me go on to a couple more examples for you, and I'll show you some other ones. This is actually a free response question. This is from an SAQ from a released 2016 ones. And again, you folks have seen this before. So 1820, immigration, to 1860. This sounds exactly like that chart we saw earlier with the squiggly lines, right? The one that looked a little something like this. Sorry to do that real quick. This is just the same chart in a different setting, and they're not asking you multiple choice questions. Now they're asking you short answer questions. So you folks are totally prepared for this. So probably they're going to ask you, briefly describe one potential cause of this. And then they'll say, briefly describe one potential result from this. And then they might say, give a reason why this was different from other immigration periods or something like that. They love comparison. They love causation. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. Sandra, you are correct. Period 9 focuses mostly on Reagan and Bush 41. There might be some stuff on 9/11, war on terror stuff, some Clinton stuff, globalization, etc. Look at the big themes, but you don't need to worry about studying on your latest, like end of Obama's era and the new Trump era. You don't need to worry about that kind of stuff. This is not a current events course. But I would know about it until 2005, 2010 is usually where I cut things off. I would not stress out about that too much, especially if you really like to follow current events and you feel like you're kind of, you know what's going on here. So then this is from a DBQ. And we're going to get into some more of the writing and some of the questions that you folks had. And document 2 from a DBQ. And this is about, I mean, Sarah, not necessarily. I doubt they'd have a question on Obama for many, many years. I think it'd be fine. Zane, I think making it a current events class is useful in the sense that you can say why history is relevant all the time. And you folks should just be knowledgeable about that in general. But it shouldn't necessarily be like that all the time. But I'm sure they're doing a great job. Lindsay, you just spoiled the whole thing. Wait a minute. But that's okay. I'm so glad you know all about that. That's fantastic. So in the chat, if you could drop me a guess, what do you think this is going to be about? What topic do you think this DBQ is about? Give me a quick guess in the chat, please. And again, notice what I did here. Blocked out everything except for the source, right? Caitlin says women's rights. Kareem says feminism. Yep, women's rights. Ethan posted a long link that I can't, something. Feminism. Yes, yeah, the subreddits, feminism, gender roles, women's rights change over time, women in the workforce post-World War II. Yeah, Rosemary, you're doing a really good job there. Fantastic. So a lot of women's movements. Some of you are very specific as to what this is about. I guess you've done this one already. So if you recognize Betty Friedan, again, if you know some history, you should know Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique, as someone commented in the chat. Nice job. And she's fighting for women's rights. She's fighting for more women's opportunities, options in the workforce, etc., and fight for women workers, gender roles, women's rights. Absolutely, absolutely. Hey, just a quick request in the chat, folks. Obviously, you folks have your own political opinions, and that's great, but let's keep that out of here for right now. We want to make sure we keep it uncluttered so people can ask some good history questions. Y'all can debate that later, of course. So if you look at document 2, we got ourselves, well, here's the actual text itself. But again, did you even really need to read that? Maybe. And that's like, I don't know who Betty Friedan is. Oh, shoot, this is going to be a train wreck. You read the document, you figure out, and you go, oh, I can figure out that she's a feminist. That makes sense. But if you know her, you basically don't even have to read it. You still should. But you already know what it's going to say, And obviously, you can get into it a lot more easily if you're able to understand what they're going to say in advance. So that's, again, my solution and my advice in all of this is look at the source first. The sourcing is so important. Absolutely. Yeah, Betty Fernand thinks housewives aren't living their best lives. Great way to put it. Yeah. And again, it's about the choice, right? Like, you can respect stay-at-home moms and dads. You can respect people in the workforce, but like, you got to have a choice. Her famous quote is the housewife that does everything every day the same and then looks up at the ceiling at night and says, "Is this all?" And doesn't have any other options in life, right? So that's one option. A couple more. This one comes from a 2017 free response question. It's released. You could look at that if you want to. When you see the word Quakers, what other word should you think of? Drop it in the chat, please. Yes, Dakota, preach. Look at the source first. I appreciate that. So when you see Quakers, what other word should come up? Drop that word in the chat, please. Pennsylvania, an excellent one. Yes, William Penn. And, ooh, it's going so fast. Sander, oh, we already talked about this, I think. But yeah, William Penn, freedom of religion, Pennsylvania, open to ideas. Pacifism is a big deal with Quakers. If you see Quakers during the Civil War, you should think abolitionism. If you see Quakers earlier than that, you should think colonial Pennsylvania for sure. If you see Quakers during this time, you should also think pacifists, middle colonies. Absolutely. One of the reasons they're pacifists is because they've been persecuted a lot. Makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah. So make sure that you know a little bit about some of those things. But if you don't, read through it and you'll discover the guy is not so in favor of fighting England. Wait a minute. Did I say something about fighting England? It must be the Revolutionary War. Hey-yo. So again, look at the date, January 1775. Okay, this is a few months before Lexington conquered, and this is before the Declaration of Independence, 1776. And yeah, could be loyalists. We don't know. We'll have to see. Let's see. If I can make sure I get back to there correctly. There we go. Ooh. So he doesn't like it. And again, this was a tough prompt, by the way. Speaking of someone who actually graded a lot of these DBQs, this was a tough prompt. It was a tough lot of documents. But man, knowing about Quakers is helpful. Madeline, I wish I could talk with you one-on-one to clarify your questions too. I'm trying to help as much as I can. If you do have a specific question, ask it in the question box below, and then I'll see what I can do. I will save some time for that for sure. And don't forget about the oatmeal. So there's some exam stuff. We'll get some of your questions about that, but that's kind of my general theme for here is like understanding what they're trying to get you to think about or ask about in the questions themselves. That's a really important exam tip. Let's go to understanding the reading. So the reading is just a fancy term for a bunch of teachers getting together, trained educators, professors, and grading your writing using the rubrics. Kareem, the live session is about an hour long, and feel free to stay for as long as you can. So keep in mind a couple things. We are highly trained, but we are still human. So make things easy for us. Absolutely. Also, make sure that you have some takeaways and you don't miss any dumb points, right? So if you know the rubrics, because we're going to use them and we know them, make sure that you know them. So that way we get along and it matches up and that's all great. Oh, I get it, Kareem. Yeah, thanks for dropping by. Have a great night. Absolutely. So some suggestions from readers that definitely don't look like this, because we don't grade in our classrooms and we don't have stereotypical stock photo boards in the background. So one thing that I always hear from myself, from my table mates, and from other people there is answer the prompt. Mr. One Grape, your handwriting is not necessarily going to be a deal breaker. I will say this, please try to make it as good as possible. It's better to have 3 pages of nicely written things rather than 7 pages that I can't read. Now, if I can't read it, I pass it along and someone will read it. But you need to make sure that it's clear. Thanks, Kareem. You're amazing as well. Have a good night. I know some of you need to check out. Yeah, Lily asks, do some teachers grade harsher or differently? No, we are all trained to grade exactly the same. We use the exact same rubric. We embrace the standards. We are trained for several hours, and we don't do any actual grading until we're trained on the same essays, and we can grade this, give the same grades to those essays. So we really get locked in. So the first advice that I always give and that I always get from other fellow readers is answer the prompt. Folks, I cannot emphasize this enough. There are so many essays that might be useful, but don't directly answer the question. That's important. So read the question, analyze it, read the question again, make sure you know the dates, make sure you know what they're asking for, make sure you know what the topic is. Is there a particular skill they're talking about? It just depends on the reader, how long they spend with each essay, but we give it its due diligence and we make sure that we read each one carefully. Absolutely. Absolutely. The reader will have a sense of history. Don't worry. We are either APUSH teachers or college professors. We know what we're talking about. And if we don't know something, if you make an obscure reference because you're a huge Hamilton fan or something, then we will check and we will always, always work to give you as many points as we possibly can. Yeah. So you should be okay. And then answer the prompt. Big deal. Analyze and explain. Please do not drop a whole bunch of vocab in your essays. And you don't have to use dates in your essays. But Sasha, if you can't remember any dates, let's talk tomorrow a little bit. I bet there are some that you can. Live stream tomorrow, 7:30 about dates, maybe somewhat helpful. Oh, absolutely. Hamilton, Dakota. Yes. So you need to analyze, you need to explain. You cannot use vocab in your essays without explaining it. If you just list a bunch of vocab, I, as the reader, don't know that you know what you're talking about, and it doesn't support your thesis, and it doesn't properly address the prompt, right? So if you get a prompt about the American Revolution and you just say, yeah, Thomas Paine's thing with Thomas Paine, common sense, that was the thing. Also, there was the Stamp Act, and then there was Lexington Concord, and then there was the Olive Branch Petition, and then there was something about King George and Lafayette. Peace, I'm out. Well, then you're not going to get a whole lot of points, right? So you want to make sure that you're explaining what you know. This is what I like to suggest for those kinds of things. For the short answer questions, by the way, same thing. You want to make sure you cite something that you're using. So answer the question directly using specific evidence, explain what the evidence is, and then tell us why that evidence matters. So your T acronym, your ACE acronym, whatever you'd like. But either way, give us some historical vocab, define that vocab, tell us why we should care, analyze it, explain it. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, it is 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow for the dates thing. So as you're dropping your vocab, you're explaining your vocab, and you're making sure that you tell us why the vocab is important. That's your SAQs, your short answer questions. Do that in your writing, your long essays. Do that in your DBQ. Make sure that every time you use vocab, that you explain what it is. You need to analyze. The more you analyze, the greater depth it is, the more points you're able to earn. You need to flood with evidence. 2 is sometimes the minimum on the long essay, which might be a source of great comfort to you, and I hope that it is. But also keep in mind that you need more. You absolutely need more. And it would be useful. You need some more stuff in order to make sure that contextualization, you get that point. You want some other points. Flood your essay with evidence. Impress the reader. Don't worry about looking like a nerd. Worry like looking like someone who doesn't want to get a 5. You want to get a 5. You want to make it hard for them to not give you full credit on all of these essays. Absolutely. So flood your essays with evidence. And then, of course, dates like we talked about. We'll talk more in depth about that tomorrow. So again, make sure that you're going through all of that, and it's fairly important to be able to answer the prompt. Make sure you're always analyzing things, and then flood your essay with evidence. Lily asks, is evidence the SFI, but we only have to ACE 1? So SFI was a term, specific factual information. People use different words for vocab, but make sure, yeah, sorry, Kareem, SFI, specific factual information. It's the term that I picked up from somewhere to describe vocab. But either way, basically anytime you use vocab in your essay or SFI or whatever, you need to make sure you're defining it. Please do that. And yeah, Dakota, same place you found it this time. So if we go back to some of the earlier slides at the very beginning, fiveable.me/APUSH should be the same place you found this one. There'll also be some tweets about it and things like that. Narajan said, what's ACE? That's just another acronym. People use different acronyms. So Tom Ritchie likes to talk about TEA for how to answer short answer questions. My friend Mr. Burkowski likes to talk about ACE, answer, cite, explain. It's just a way of making sure that you say you got to answer your short answer questions with vocab. You got to explain what the vocab means. You need to tell us why that vocab answers the question. Why should I give you the point? We can talk more about that in a little bit if you'd like. So other questions and concerns, I told you I'd leave some time. So let me turn off my screen sharing so you all have to see more of my ugly mug on the screen here. Hey, I'm back, and I'm only slightly sweatier. So let's look at some of those top questions you have and continue to answer and ask questions in the chat. So most common mistakes you see in the DBQs and how we can avoid doing them. So I would say, thank you for the question, Mia, first of all. And secondly, common mistakes on the DBQ, not reading a document correctly, not using the proper number of documents, not answering the question. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So make sure that you're answering the question directly. Remember, on any essay, document-based question or long essay, the most important paragraph is your intro paragraph. That contextualization is a point. The thesis is a point. If you have a good intro paragraph, you got 2 out of 7 points on the DBQ, 2 out of 6 on the LEQ already, and you're well on your way to doing really well if you have that set up really well. Take the time to plan and take the time to write that really well. Other common mistakes, you cannot group documents and you cannot quote documents. I mean, you can, but please do not quote your documents. We will completely skip over that. We already know what the documents say, and we've read them a bazillion times. Quoting the documents, other than a few like 1 or 2 word phrases that you absolutely must quote, doesn't show that you know what you're talking about. Paraphrasing the documents, summarizing it, analyzing it, telling us why it matters or what was happening at the time period, that matters. You can use more than one document in a body paragraph, absolutely. In fact, please do. You should. Yeah. This could be like your standard 5-paragraph essay, right, where you have a couple body paragraphs, 2, 3, 4, and you want to have some evidence in every one. Some of that evidence could be docs. Some evidence could be outside vocab. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see. Joel asked, how can I avoid saying in conclusion or to conclude in an LEQ or DBQ? That's not bad language. We don't really mind it. I mean, it's just transition language. Use whatever feels comfortable to you. You could always say, I always urge my students in their final paragraph, restate your thesis, because something else we're going to talk about here is DBQs and LEQs. Your thesis can be found in one of 2 places, the intro and the conclusion. Your thesis cannot be anywhere else. Well, what's the intro? What's the conclusion? Let's get all technical here. Well, you need to make sure that you have a big paragraph with your context and your thesis, and a big paragraph at the end that just restates your thesis. Not a big paragraph, but another one there. If you have 2 paragraphs that are bookends, it's very clear which ones are going to be your intro and your conclusion. There's no problems there at all. So always restate your thesis at the end. That's a big deal. Let's see. Yeah, never use direct quotes. Paraphrasing is always better. I mean, again, you can quote some things, but basically just never do it. It's almost never a good idea. And then when you're citing, feel free to talk about just using parentheses. So parentheses 6, parenthesis. You don't need to say document 6. You don't need to say the author's name, document 6. This is not MLA style. Just do it really quick. Daniel's got it down. Absolutely. Julie asks the common topics on the test. You know, it's really hard to say. I can give you a brief overview of some things I'd like to talk about a lot. Period 1 is all about colony comparison and Columbian Exchange. Period 2, more colony comparison and the road to the American Revolution and slavery. Period 3 is all about the American Revolution itself, Constitution, and Washington Adams. Period 4, antebellum reform movements, the Jefferson-Jackson era, slavery, manifest destiny, getting there. Let me interrupt myself a second. Please do paraphrase on the DBQ, as someone said. And then period 5 is the road to the Civil War and its aftermath, aka Reconstruction. That's period 5. Fits together really well. Period 6 is a hot mess, although it's fantastic and great stuff. Period 6 is everything after the Civil War that involves like the Second Industrial Revolution. It involves westward expansion. It involves some of the progressive and populist eras, although that kind of bleeds into period 7. And that's going to be a big deal as well. Period 7 is going to be the United States on the world stage, and it's also a monstrosity of a period. So is a Spanish-American War, 1920s, 1930s is going to be a Great Depression and New Deal, and then World War II. Period 8 is going to be the Cold War over the whole thing, and then a little bit into period 9, of course. And then that's also going to have things like women's rights movement, civil rights movement, all just in general, and then changes in the presidencies, for sure. First Industrial Revolution. There's different answers if you're talking about world history versus U.S. history, but for our purposes in APUSH, let's just say period 6 is the Industrial Revolution. That means, and sometimes people call it the second one, right? Because that's the heavy industry, the steel, right? The first one is sometimes like the period 4 with the Lowell mills and all those kinds of things, the first factories, etc. So pre-Civil War Industrial Revolution would be any time after about 1820, I'd say. So when you get those spinning mills, you get the combines going, right? Steel plow, etc. All right. So how should you budget your time on LEQs and DB? Oh, I didn't finish period 9. Period 9, a rise of conservatism, end of the Cold War, America's new role on the world stage after the Cold War. How should you budget your time on the LEQs and DBQs? Please do the DBQ first. It is worth far more points. It's worth about 25% more if I remember off the top of my head. It is worth a lot of points. I believe the number is around every point on the DBQ is worth about 4 multiple choice questions. So that's a big deal. Please start with the DBQ. Please use the 15-minute suggested reading period and planning period to read the documents and to plan your essay. You should not write before that. Absolutely. You need to make sure that you get to the LEQ eventually, but the DBQ is going to take more time. It just does. You have an hour and 40 minutes. That's 100 minutes to be able to do the entire thing. The DBQ is supposed to take 60 minutes, and that includes the 15-minute planning period. I would guess most people should or may take a little bit longer on that. Excuse me. And that's totally fine. But I would make sure that you don't wait too much longer. So the person who's proctoring your exam will tell you when there's the start. They will warn you when the 15-minute period has ended, but you're more than welcome to start writing before that. That's totally legal, totally fine. And then they'll warn you when the 15-minute period is up. They'll warn you when 60 minutes have passed, and thus you are suggested to move on to the next question. But you don't have to. Keep that in mind. And then they will warn you when you have 10 minutes left. That's a big deal. Absolutely. So we got some of that. Thanks for that question. Let's see. Tips for the LEQ and how to outline it. So Dakota, LEQ is just our APUSH speak for long essay question. Caitlin, it is not the same amount of time for the DBQ and LEQ. The DBQ is supposed to be 60 minutes. Long essay is supposed to be 40 minutes, although it's in one big chunk and you may use it however you want. The long essay is kind of like a DBQ without documents, although I always say the DBQ is like an LEQ with documents, right? So the long essay question could be something like, describe the changes in African Americans after the Civil War until 1900. Go. And your job is to talk about different changes, maybe some things that stayed the same. They still struggled for first-class citizenship, but managed to gain freedom, obviously, and some economic advantages through moving out west, exodusters, etc. You can do that kind of stuff. So a long essay question relies entirely on you and your historical knowledge, and thus it's harder because you have to just straight up memorize things. But some good news about that, you also have 3 options. So they are in the same section. You're able to move freely between the DBQ and the LEQ. And keep in mind, there are 3 LEQ options. One's from period 1 through 3, one's from periods 4 through 6, and one is from periods 7 through 9. So you are able to choose whichever one you would want, and that is fantastic. Do the one you think you do the best on. There's no points for doing the harder one. Do what you think would be best, please. Absolutely. And then you get the chance to write the LEQ, and that's just based on all of your stuff. All the stuff that you know. The DBQ is more complex because it involves document analysis, but they give you the documents, and that should get you some stuff. It should be able to, give you some historical knowledge if you're totally lost. So let's see. How do we decide what to write for DBQs and LEQs? Is it a compare or contrast a cause and effect, or a CCOT? Are there words in the prompts that we can look for? Yeah, I would say look for synonyms, right? So if they talk about like what made this happen, or what was a change, or how did things develop, or what were the differences, right? Look for those kinds of things. Absolutely. There are some keywords you can look for that might be useful for that. And you can look up some keywords. Just Google like APUSH essay keywords, and you should be able to find some of those. Let's see. Next one, how should we approach the documents during your planning period? At least good question. So on the DBQ during your planning period, you want to read through all the documents. You are required to use 6 of them to get the double document points. And using, meaning like show that you know what it's talking about and tie it into your thesis. And then you get another point for analyzing them using the HIP or the HAPPY or whatever one you use. Make sure that you are able to read them all quickly. And what I like to do is, as I read them, you obviously start with the source like we talked about tonight, right? Start with the source. And then I like to write single or 2-word phrases on the side that basically summarize what it is or what I think it's about. And then you do that as quickly as possible, going through all of those. And then once you're done with that, you begin to think about, all right, what's the contextualization I can do? What kind of outside evidence do I have? Because it's only outside if it's not mentioned in the documents. You can talk about maybe what's my thesis going to be? How can I make these documents fit together? What sort of categories could I use in my thesis? Are 3 documents all talking about changes in African Americans' lives after the Civil War? Well, then I better say something about that. How could I put them all together? Yeah. So that's what I would do during your planning period. Start outlining your essay as best you can. Let's see. We talked about that one already. Contextualization we talked about a little bit already. Joe, unfortunately, I have no predictions on the DBQ topic. You just don't know. Other than what Tanner said, it's going to be from periods 2 to 8. It won't be on period 1 or 9 by itself. But otherwise, I have no predictions. Some people say, hey, we haven't had a reconstruction prompt in a while. Feel free to go for that. Sure. You could. I'll tell you this: it's going to be on some big topic, and you'll do just fine. You'll do just fine. Absolutely. Talked about some of that stuff. Esther asks, do you think it's worth to read the excerpts in multiple choice or just look at the author since it's short on time? Again, reading the author is important. It's a good first step. It is not a substitute for reading the entire thing. You just can't. So sometimes they'll ask you, or for instance, Bill Clinton even. You don't know if it's asking about Bill Clinton, the Democrat, or Bill Clinton, the kind of Republican. He's a Democratic president, but he takes on some characteristics of both parties, and you have to read the document to be able to figure that out. So read the source to be able to figure out an initial guess as to what's going to happen, but then you definitely need to be able to read the entire thing. Don't get too bogged down on it. If you don't know a word, use context. You don't have to. You can't skip it. You can't skip it, and you definitely can't read every single word either. So just do as well as you can. Let's see. How much can you get wrong to still get a 5? I don't really know. Let me put it this way. Getting a 5 is difficult. About 11, and it depends on the year, obviously. It's because it's curved, but about 8 to 12% of people get a 5 every year out of the 500,000 people that take the exam. So it's not easy, and you really need to nail it. My advice to you is if you're getting more than half of the points on some of the writing exercises that you're doing, right? If you're getting 4 out of 7s on the DBQ, 3 out of 6s on the LEQs, if you're getting 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 on the SAQs, you're on your way to getting a 4. And if you're above that, you're on your way to getting in the 5. So that's fantastic. Dakota, I don't want to be too snarky here. What exam? What's the exam mostly going to be about? American history. No, but that's why the key concepts are so important, right? American history doesn't help you. You can't study all of APUSH again. You just took the course that took you a year, and you went pretty fast, right? So I would make sure that you're studying some of the big themes. Look at the themes again. Look at the key concepts again. And if you have enough time, then start drilling further and further down into that outline. That's a really good idea. Yeah. Exam review books, whatever works best for you. Some of them have really, actually, Fiveable published an ultimate guide to APUSH, which I believe you can get on their website somewhere, or email them. You have to give them your email or something like that. But either way, find the review book that does the best for you. So some of them have really great reviews and in terms of content. Some of them have really great reviews in terms of practice questions. And some of them have a great combination of both. Some are too long and stuff like that. Hey, Ethan, you have the same map behind me? Oh, that thing is sweet. I love it. I love it. Let's see. Certain topics that tend to appear on the test every year, says Julie. Yeah, great question. I would say, hey, there you go. Dakota, thank you for posting the link. Appreciate it. That's that ultimate guide to Fiveable that we were talking about in the chat. So frequently tested topics. They love to ask about the Columbian Exchange. Love it. They love to ask about the differences between the colonies and like the French versus the British versus the Spanish versus the Dutch. They love to ask about that. Diana, I'm Lagerway. That's me, the dude leading the whole thing. I only introduced myself once. Period 3, they love to ask about the Articles of Confederation. They also love to ask about the 7 Years' War. 7 Years' War comes up all the time. Period 4, they love to ask about Andrew Jackson, about the market revolution. And then period 5 is Road to the Civil War and Reconstruction are big topics. We haven't seen a lot of Civil War stuff itself, but like Emancipation Proclamation stuff could be big. There's a lot of stuff in period 6, particularly as it goes to industrialization. Period 7, there's just a ton in period 7 and 8, but I would say frequently tested stuff, imperialism, maybe New Deal with FDR, something about World War II, and then Sarah, yeah, slavery is really big. That's the road to the Civil War, right? And then the aftermath, Reconstruction. Period 7 also going to have a lot more feminism stuff, right? So you want to be able to trace that throughout APUSH, but period 7 has Elizabeth Cady Stanton is period 4 with the Seneca Falls Convention, but this has the culmination with the 19th Amendment in 1920, and so that's kind of a big deal. Period 8 is Cold War, is rights movements, is growth of liberalism, and then period 9 is, again, rise of conservatism, end of Cold War, and war on terror. Period 7 is kind of confusing in terms of its time period. I know it's 1898 to 1945, so Spanish-American War until the end of World War II. Some people put it back to 1890. So Mia, you're actually technically correct there. So like the road to the Spanish-American War gets included there. There's some overlap with period 6. But either way, as long as you know it's like American imperialism goes abroad, that'd do well. Let's see. Christian asks, do we need to know the Supreme Court cases? Well, that's where the concept outline comes in handy. If the Supreme Court case is listed in there, you got to know it. Marbury v. Madison, those kinds of things. You got to know those. Looking at the course guide, but that's so much to study. How do you suggest we break it down with this limited time? So honestly, what I would do is start with the big stuff. I don't know how much time you have. You got to live your best life. Absolutely. And you have other classes and you need to eat, sleep, and be healthy, happy humans. Please do that. So start with the big stuff, read through each period and go, all right, I got the, so each period, well, actually, let me show you this. I'll pull it up on my screen in a second. So at the start of each period, they have an overview that has the dates on it. And give me half a moment. Share my screen. We're a little over time, so if you have to take off, folks, I understand. We'll be wrapping up in just a second here. So hopefully you should be able to see this. All right, period 7. Period 7, if we go back a page, has the dates right there, so that might be useful. And then I would start right here. So my key concepts. Do I know enough about growth? And then go over to the thematic learning objectives and just do these. Maybe do 2, 3, 4 of those a night. That's a really good way to do it. And see if you can answer some of those questions using some vocab. That's the best way to do it. That'd be the best way to tackle it, I think. If you're interested in more about dates, and again, tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're talking about dates and how to use those to focus your study a little bit. Also might be a little bit helpful. Okay, so we've gone more than an hour. Thanks for sticking around. Hopefully you learned something. I'm sorry I couldn't get to more questions. If you have more of those, maybe tomorrow night. Remember, Mr. Ritchie streams a lot on this channel. There's a lot going on in Fiveable these weeks. Please check it out and make sure that you have whatever streams you need to check in. I'll be live tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll be talking about dates and another way to study for the APUSH exam. If it was helpful, thank you for saying so, and thank you for joining me. Thanks for posting Braille in the chat, because that's definitely useful. It's free tomorrow as long as it's live streamed, so show up at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Check out that Fiveable subscription if you would like to stream these later. But otherwise, thanks for joining us. Have a great evening. Good luck on that test, and you can get a 5. You can do it. I believe in every one of you.